I am Julian, 32 years old. On the night of my 32nd birthday, my own mother threw a property transfer deed directly at my chest. It fluttered to the hardwood floor of the home I had bled to build from the ground up. While I was standing there in my own living room, offering them the dinner I had cooked with my own hands, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Sign it. Give this house to your brother. He drives a Porsche, he is a senior manager, and he needs this real estate as a stepping stone for his future. You have been a failure your whole life anyway. Keeping this place is just selfish." My father and my brother laughed at me right there, standing on the rug I bought, drinking the wine I poured for them. But there was one thing they didn't know. The legal documents securing my full and absolute acquisition of the exact corporation where her golden child worked were sitting in my briefcase in the next room. I owned his desk. I owned his salary. I owned his future. And now they are the ones begging for a fraction of what they tried to steal from me. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little world piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from down in the comments. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare really started. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful evening. I am a man who deeply appreciates the silence of a house that belongs entirely to him. I spent years living out of cheap motels and cramped apartments with leaky roofs, so every square inch of my current home was a testament to my survival. It was a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a highly sought-after, quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of neighborhood with strict HOA rules, manicured lawns, and neighbors who actually waved at you in the morning. For my 32nd birthday, I had prepared a simple, elegant meal. I am not one for loud parties. I marinated a thick cut of steak, opened a very decent, aged bottle of red wine I had been saving, and set the dining table for one. The soft amber glow of the pendant lights reflected off the polished mahogany table. Everything was perfect. Everything was quiet. When the doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, the sharp sound shattered the tranquility of my home. I wasn't expecting company. I actually thought it was my lawyer, Tobias, dropping off some final compliance paperwork for the massive corporate acquisition we had been working on tirelessly for the past 8 months. I walked to the front door, wiping my hands on a fresh kitchen towel, feeling a rare, fleeting sense of peace. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Instead of Tobias holding a stack of legal briefs, I opened the door to find my mother, Vera, my father, Silas, and my younger brother, Rowan. Rowan was 28 years old, but he walked into my house with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the entire zip code. He was twirling the keys to a brand new Porsche on his index finger, making absolutely sure the Silver Crest logo caught the hallway light perfectly, so I couldn't possibly miss it. He was wearing a designer suit that looked like it had been tailored that very morning. My mother marched in right behind him, carrying a thick, heavy manila envelope tucked tightly under her right arm. She wore a sharp, tailored dress and her usual expression of perpetual disappointment whenever she looked at me. My father brought up the rear, wiping his expensive leather shoes on my welcome mat with an exaggerated, dismissive scrape that felt entirely intentional. There was no "Happy birthday, Julian." There was no cake. There was no warm embrace or motherly smile. There was only a cold, calculating, predatory scan of my living room. They looked at the high ceilings, the custom crown molding, and the expensive hardwood floors like they were assessing the value of a bank vault they were about to rob. My parents had always treated me like an unwanted guest in their own lives. I was the practice child. I was the rough draft they merely tolerated until their absolute golden boy, Rowan, arrived 4 years later. Despite a lifetime of coldness, I still led them to the dining table. I offered them drinks. I pulled out extra chairs from the spare room and played the role of the dutiful, welcoming son. I did this because a small, pathetic, deeply buried part of my inner child still thought that maybe, just maybe, they had actually come to celebrate my existence. I poured 3 generous glasses of wine, placing them carefully on the marble coasters I had bought from a small artisan shop downtown. I asked them how the drive over was. I asked them if they wanted me to put some more food on the stove. I was entirely, foolishly wrong. My mother did not even bother to sit down. She stood at the head of my dining table, surveying the modest but highly valuable real estate I had secured. She took a sip of the wine, didn't compliment it, and then tossed the heavy manila envelope directly onto the center of the dining table. The heavy thud of the thick paper echoed in the quiet room, breaking the fragile peace of my evening completely. She looked at me, her eyes devoid of any maternal warmth, and told me to open it. Her voice was not a request. It was a military command. I set down my own wine glass. I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy, official, and smelled faintly of a law office. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stapled at the corner. I am a man who deals with complex corporate contracts daily, so I recognized the formatting immediately. It was a quitclaim deed. It was a highly specific legal mechanism designed to transfer the complete title and ownership of my home directly into Rowan's name. It was drafted by a very expensive local law firm, complete with notarization blocks, witness signature lines, and absolute forfeiture clauses. I looked up at her, waiting for the punchline. I waited for her to laugh and say it was a bizarre joke. There was no laugh. Her face was set in absolute, unforgiving stone. She crossed her arms over her chest and told me that Rowan was up for a massive, career-defining promotion at his firm, Meridian Corporation. She said he was going to be a regional director, a position of extreme power and influence. She explained, with a slow, condescending tone usually reserved for speaking to a very slow, misbehaving child, that he needed to host executive dinners. He needed to impress the senior board members and high-profile clients. He needed to project an image of undeniable wealth, stability, and success. My house, she pointed out with a wave of her hand, was in a prime location. It had the right zip code. It had the right open-concept layout for entertaining catered events. It was exactly what he needed to secure his new executive salary and climb the corporate ladder to the very top. I stared at her for a long moment. I asked her, keeping my voice perfectly level, where exactly I was supposed to live once I handed over the keys to the house I had spent 5 grueling years paying off completely. My father scoffed loudly. He leaned heavily against my granite kitchen counter, swirling the expensive wine I had poured for him without a trace of gratitude. He told me I could easily rent a small, one-bedroom apartment somewhere downtown. He said I was single, I had no dependents, no wife, no children, and I was running a dead end, failing consulting business that barely kept the lights on. He said I did not need a 3-bedroom house with a landscaped backyard and a 2-car garage. He framed this blatant theft as a noble family duty. He looked me dead in the eye and said I owed it to my younger brother to support his rise to the top. He reminded me that real families make sacrifices for one another, and it was long past time that I sacrificed for the greater good of the family name. Rowan finally spoke up. He gave me that signature, arrogant smirk. It was the exact same smirk he had perfected since childhood, back when he would intentionally break my favorite toys and cry to my mother, blaming it on me. He took a sip of his wine and told me he would be generous. He said he would let me keep the furniture because it was cheap and did not match his modern, high-end aesthetic anyway. He said it was just business, Julian, and I should not take it so personally. He walked over to the front window, pulled back the curtain, and pointed outside to his gleaming new Porsche parked in my driveway, the streetlights reflecting beautifully off its polished hood. He claimed that winners make hard sacrifices, and it was time I sacrificed the only thing of value I had for a real winner. I looked down at the deed. I looked at the 3 of them standing in my home. I felt a very familiar, icy coldness wash over me. It was a chilling, absolute realization that I was utterly alone in this family. And I always had been. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not throw them out into the street. I did not break the wine glasses against the wall. I carefully folded the quitclaim deed, aligning the edges perfectly, and slid it back into the manila envelope. I looked at my mother and told her I needed 3 days to review the complex paperwork with an attorney. My mother rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out a loud, frustrated sigh. She called me unnecessarily difficult. She warned me not to drag this process out, threatening to cut me off completely from the family if I ruined her golden boy's bright future. She said if I delayed the transfer, I would be solely responsible for destroying his career, and she would never forgive me. They turned around in unison and walked out of my house. They did not say goodbye. They did not thank me for the wine. The heavy front door clicked shut, leaving me standing in the oppressive, heavy silence of my own home. I walked over to the window and watched the Porsche's taillights illuminate the dark street as it sped away, the engine roaring loudly through the quiet suburban neighborhood. I gripped the wooden windowsill until my knuckles turned completely white, the wood biting into my skin. They wanted my house. They wanted my blood. They wanted everything I had built. I decided right then and there, staring into the dark street, that I would give them exactly the kind of ruthless business transaction they were asking for. I thought the worst of their entitlement was on full display that night. I was so incredibly, dangerously wrong. To truly understand the sheer, unadulterated audacity of their demand for my home, you have to understand exactly what they did to me 10 years ago. You have to understand the deep, rotting foundation of betrayal that my family built their comfortable lives upon. When I was 22 years old, I was working 3 different jobs just to keep my head above water. I was entirely, fiercely self-funded. Growing up, I was repeatedly told by both my parents that we were strictly middle class, that money was incredibly tight, and that I would have to rely entirely on my own grit and hard work if I ever wanted a college education. They told me there was no hidden college fund. They told me there were no handouts, no safety nets. So I did exactly what I had to do to survive. I worked brutal night shifts at a massive logistics warehouse, loading heavy boxes onto freight trucks until my spine felt like shattered glass and my hands were covered in permanent calluses. I tutored privileged high school kids in advanced math during the late afternoons. I worked every single weekend at a greasy local diner, scrubbing burnt food off flat-top grills until my clothes permanently smelled like old cooking oil. I saved every single penny I earned. I skipped meals, living off cheap ramen and tap water. I wore the exact same 3 pairs of jeans for 4 entire years, stitching up the holes myself. I put all my meager earnings into a high-yield college savings fund I had specifically set up at a local credit union. Because I was only 18 when I originally opened the account, the bank required a cosigner. My father had insisted on being that joint account holder for tax purposes. He told me it was standard procedure. I trusted him. He was my father. Why wouldn't I trust him? Then came the Thanksgiving dinner that broke my reality forever. I had come home exhausted after pulling a double shift at the warehouse. I smelled like wet cardboard, cheap diner coffee, and physical exhaustion. The house, however, smelled like roasted turkey, fresh rosemary herbs, and expensive imported wine. I walked into the warm kitchen, fully expecting to find my mother stressing over the gravy or the stuffing. Instead, I found my parents standing in the center of the kitchen, raising crystal glasses to toast Rowan, who was only 18 at the time. They were celebrating his brand new tech startup venture. Rowan had an idea for an app. It was something incredibly trivial, a useless social networking tool for college frat parties that never even made it to the prototype phase, let alone the market. I dropped my heavy duffel bag by the door and asked them, genuinely curious, how they were funding a tech startup when we supposedly had no money. My mother, with a completely straight face, took a slow sip of her red wine and told me they had used the joint savings account at the credit union. My heart literally stopped beating for a second. The world around me went completely silent, a high-pitched ringing filling my ears. I ran up the stairs to my old childhood room, tripping over the steps, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open my cheap, refurbished laptop. I logged into my credit union online portal. The screen loaded agonizingly slowly. I stared at the numbers on the screen. I refreshed the page 3 times, praying it was a technical glitch. The account holding my entire college fund, my blood, my sweat, and my absolute misery for 4 long years, was completely, entirely drained. Over $40,000. Gone. A zero balance staring back at me. I walked slowly back downstairs, my legs feeling like lead. I confronted them in the living room. I demanded to know where my money was. My father did not even have the common decency to look ashamed or apologetic. He stood by the brick fireplace, swirling his wine glass casually, and told me that family wealth was communal property. He said Rowan's startup had a much higher projected return on investment than my plain, boring business management degree. He looked at me with a look of sheer, unfiltered disappointment and said my degree was a complete waste of time and money, but Rowan was a natural-born visionary who needed capital. When I raised my voice, when the panic set in and I demanded they pay me back every single cent they stole, my mother stepped forward. Her eyes were cold. She pointed her finger directly at the front door. She told me to pack my bags immediately. She said no son of hers would threaten the peace of the family over a little bit of money on Thanksgiving Day. She said I was being incredibly greedy and ungrateful for the roof they had provided me for 18 years, as if raising your own child is a debt that must be repaid with stolen funds. They kicked me out into the freezing November night. I had absolutely nothing but a gym duffel bag, a thin winter coat with a broken zipper, and a bank account that read zero. I walked 3 miles in the freezing sleet to a cheap, roach-infested motel, shivering, crying silently, and realizing the darkest truth of my life. My parents did not love me. They never did. I was just a resource to be mined for their golden child. That freezing night in that cheap motel room was the night Julian, the dutiful son, officially died, and Julian, the ruthless businessman, was born. I spent the next decade building an absolute empire from the mud up. I took out brutal, high-interest student loans. I studied global market trends until my eyes bled and my vision blurred. I met Tobias in a senior business ethics seminar. Tobias was a brilliant, hungry, incredibly sharp law student who had also been screwed over by the system and his own family. We bonded over our mutual anger and ambition. Together, we started a private equity firm that specialized in aggressively acquiring distressed assets. We operated entirely in the shadows. I never, ever used my face for public relations. I kept my lifestyle incredibly quiet and modest. I drove a highly reliable, boring sedan. I wore unbranded, impeccably tailored suits that didn't flash designer labels. To my family, I was just a struggling consultant running a failed shell company out of a cheap, leaky office building. To the global financial world, I was a ghost. A very wealthy, very ruthless, completely untouchable ghost. Which brings us right back to the present day. The morning after the birthday ambush, my doorbell rang again. I was sitting at my kitchen island, drinking black coffee, carefully reviewing the Meridian Corp acquisition files. I checked the security camera feed on my tablet. It was my Aunt Beatrix. Aunt Beatrix was my mother's older sister. Growing up, she had always played the role of the sweet, understanding, diplomatic peacemaker. She was the one who brought me homemade chocolate chip cookies when my parents grounded me unjustly. She was the one who patted my shoulder and told me to just be patient with my parents, that they were stressed, that they loved me deep down. I unlocked the front door and let her in. I poured her a cup of hot chamomile tea and waited to see what her angle was. She sat delicately on my living room sofa, looking around my home with a soft, deeply pitying smile. She smoothed her expensive floral skirt, patted my hand gently, and told me she had heard all about the terrible house situation from my mother. She used her softest, most concerning, motherly voice. She told me I should just sign the papers and get it over with. She said my mother was losing sleep over Rowan's promotion, that the stress was making her physically ill. She said that giving up the house would finally earn me the unconditional family love and respect I had always desperately wanted. She talked endlessly about the importance of family, about how inheritance, money, and property mean absolutely nothing compared to the sacred bond of blood. She said I was strong enough to start over from scratch, but Rowan was fragile and needed this win. I almost believed her deep concern. Almost. I excused myself to the kitchen to get more hot water for her tea. My phone was sitting on the glass coffee table, right next to her floral teacup. I had intentionally left it on the voice memo record function. It was a habit I developed in ruthless corporate negotiations. Trust absolutely no one, verify absolutely everything. When I came back with the kettle, I poured her water. She thanked me profusely, finished her tea, and left, reminding me one last time to be the bigger person and do the right thing for the family. I locked the front door until it clicked. I walked back to the living room, picked up my phone, and played the recording. The high-definition audio caught her making a phone call the exact second I walked out of earshot into the kitchen. Her sweet, melodic, motherly voice dropped instantly into a venomous, sharp, greedy whisper. She was talking to my mother. I heard her say, clear as day, "Vera, I'm at his place now. He's weak. He looks tired and defeated. Keep the pressure on him. Don't let up. Once you get the deed signed, we can flip this prime real estate on the market, pay off my credit card debts, and you get the rest for Rowan. Just make sure the idiot signs it before he talks to a real lawyer." My own aunt, the sweet, cookie-baking peacemaker. She was the architect of the entire robbery. She was actively manipulating my mother to steal my home just to pay off her own reckless shopping debts. A cold, absolute, terrifying fury settled deep in my chest. I did not feel sad. I did not feel betrayed or heartbroken. I felt completely weaponized. My phone buzzed aggressively in my hand. It was Tobias. "Julian," Tobias said. His voice clipped, fast, and highly professional. "You have a massive problem on your hands. Your mother didn't just ask for the house. She went absolutely nuclear. She hired Lorelei. I knew Lorelei. Everyone in the city's high-end legal circle knew Lorelei. She was a vicious, unethical bulldog of a local attorney known for destroying families in high-stakes divorce and custody battles. She was a scavenger who fed on human misery and desperation. Lorelei just filed a preliminary injunction at the courthouse," Tobias continued, the frantic sound of keyboard typing echoing loudly in the background. "Your parents are claiming they provided the original down payment for your house 10 years ago under a verbal agreement that it was a family trust. It's a complete lie, but they are trying to freeze all your assets and force an immediate sale through a fabricated, dragged-out lawsuit. They were actually suing me for the home I bought with the money I made after they stole my college fund. They were trying to rob me twice. I walked over to my home office. I moved a stack of books and opened the heavy, fireproof biometric safe hidden behind my bookshelf. I pulled out a thick, black leather binder. Inside was the finalized, board-approved, legally binding contract for the hostile takeover of Meridian Corp., the very company where Rowan was expecting his grand promotion. I looked out the window at the quiet, peaceful street. "Tobias," I said into the phone, my voice dead calm. "Let them file the lawsuit. Let them think they have me completely cornered. Let them spend their money on Lorelei. But I need you to run a deep, forensic background check on Rowan's personal finances. I want to know exactly how a mid-level manager affords a brand new Porsche. Dig into the dirt. Find every skeleton. Consider it done, boss," Tobias said. I hung up the phone. I realized then that they were not just trying to take my home. They were trying to erase me from existence. They wanted me destroyed. I was fully prepared to fight them in a courtroom for years, but what Tobias found the very next day changed the game entirely. 2 days before Rowan's highly anticipated, lavish promotion party, my office door swung open violently without a knock. I operated out of a modest, unbranded, slightly run-down brick building on the edge of the city's industrial district. It was a decoy office I specifically used for low-level meetings, designed intentionally to look like a struggling, failing logistics consultancy. The carpets were slightly worn, the desks were standard cheap particle board, and there was absolutely no receptionist. Rowan walked in, wearing a bespoke Italian suit that easily cost more than my first 3 cars combined. He didn't come alone. Standing right behind him, looking nervously at the cheap floor tiles and refusing to make eye contact, was Victor. Victor was my senior financial analyst. More importantly, years ago, Victor was my mentor. When I was kicked out of my house at 22, working night shifts and desperately trying to understand the stock market at the local library, Victor was an older, seasoned trader who took pity on me. He taught me how to read market trends, how to spot distressed assets, how to survive the sharks. When I started my real firm and made my first million, I gave him a very comfortable, highly paid job at my decoy company out of pure respect for our past. I paid for his wife's medical treatments. He was the one man in this world I thought I could genuinely trust. Rowan leaned heavily over my cheap desk, planting his manicured hands right on top of my printed paperwork. He looked around the small, sparse office, taking in the water stains on the ceiling, and let out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the cheap walls. "Look at this pathetic place, Julian. It literally smells like desperation and cheap coffee." Rowan sneered, his lip curling in disgust. "Mom told me you're dragging your feet on the house transfer. I thought I'd come down here to this dump and show you what real, tangible success actually looks like." He clapped Victor hard on the shoulder. Victor flinched visibly but forced a weak, pathetic, submissive smile. "Victor here is a very smart guy," Rowan said, gesturing to the older man like he was a prize horse he just bought. "He knows a sinking ship when he sees one. I just offered him a senior advisory role at Meridian Corporation. He's leaving you, Julian, today, because even your own employees know you're a complete dead end. Your business is a joke, and you are a joke." I looked directly at Victor. I didn't show an ounce of anger. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clench my fists. I just stared at him, my face a mask of absolute calm. Victor couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the wall above my head and mumbled something pathetic about needing a better salary. He talked fast, stumbling over his words, talking about securing his retirement, his 401k, inflation. He said Rowan had offered him a massive, six-figure signing bonus he simply couldn't refuse at his age. "Is that right, Victor?" I asked quietly, leaning back in my squeaky chair. Rowan slammed his hand on my desk, leaning in close, his cologne overpowering the smell of the room. "Sign the house over today, Julian. You have absolutely no leverage. You have no money. You don't even have loyalty from your own staff. Mom and Dad are bringing the lawyer to your place tonight. You either sign the quitclaim deed, or Lorelei buries you in legal fees until you have to sell this pathetic little office just to afford groceries. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Be a good loser." He threw a mock, sarcastic salute, turned on his expensive heel, and walked out of the office. Victor scurried out right after him like an obedient, terrified dog, not looking back once. I sat alone in the heavy silence of my decoy office. I gripped the edge of the cheap desk, feeling the rough laminate under my fingers. My own mother, my own aunt, and now the man who taught me how to survive in this industry. They were all selling me out, stabbing me in the back for a tiny piece of Rowan's grand illusion. My secure, encrypted computer monitor chimed softly. It was an urgent email from Tobias. The subject line simply read, "The Porsche. You need to see this now." I opened the attached file. What I read over the next hour was a masterpiece of absolute, catastrophic financial ruin. Rowan was not a successful executive. Rowan was a massive, desperate fraud. Tobias had uncovered a trail of devastating, inescapable debt that was mathematically impossible to recover from. The brand new Porsche was not a company perk. It was leased under a high-interest subprime loan that was already 60 days past due. The dealership was preparing to repossess it. His luxury downtown apartment, the one he constantly bragged about on social media, was 3 months behind on rent, facing active, aggressive eviction proceedings. But the worst part, the absolute nail in his coffin, Rowan had taken out massive, unregulated cash loans from violent, black market lenders to fund his lavish lifestyle, buy designer clothes, and impress the senior board at Meridian. He was drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of illegal shadow debt. The promotion to regional director at Meridian Corp was real, but the salary increase wasn't nearly enough to cover the massive hole he had dug for himself. The interest rates alone were eating him alive. He needed a massive lump sum of cash immediately, or he was going to federal prison for corporate embezzlement, or worse, he was going to get his legs broken by his very impatient creditors. That was the real reason they needed my house. Aunt Beatrix and my mother were actively, desperately conspiring to flip my prime real estate to save their golden boy from the brutal, violent consequences of his own massive ego. That evening, the storm finally hit my front door with full force. I was sitting in my living room, watching the heavy rain hit the windows, when 4 luxury cars pulled aggressively into my driveway, blocking me in. Out stepped my mother, my father, Rowan, the aggressive bulldog lawyer Lorelei, and a man I recognized instantly, Cashin, the regional manager of the local bank where I kept my decoy checking account. They did not knock. My mother used the spare key I had foolishly given her years ago for emergencies. They flooded into my living room like an invading army, tracking wet mud onto my pristine hardwood floors without a care in the world. Lorelei, wearing a sharp, intimidating gray suit, marched right up to me and threw a massive stack of legal documents directly onto my glass coffee table. She was a woman who clearly enjoyed the art of intimidation and destruction. "Julian," Lorelei barked, not even bothering to introduce herself, treating me like a criminal. "We are bypassing the long lawsuit. Takes too long. Mr. Cashin here has thoroughly reviewed your accounts. Your father is a co-signer on a very old line of credit you opened when you were 21. He is legally calling the debt in. We are freezing your credit lines across the board. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee by tomorrow morning. Your accounts are locked." Cashin, the bank manager, puffed out his chest, adjusting his silk tie. "It's standard banking procedure," he lied smoothly, looking everywhere but at my face. "Your father claims extreme financial mismanagement on the joint liability. I had to lock the accounts immediately to protect the bank's assets and his credit score." I looked at my father. He was standing by the door with his arms crossed, a look of absolute, sickening triumph on his face. He was smiling. He was willing to destroy my financial standing, ruin my credit score forever, and starve me out just to bail out his favorite son. My mother stepped forward, her eyes blazing with toxic, absolute authority. "This is the end of the line, Julian. You are completely outmatched. Sign the deed right now. Give Rowan the house. It's the only way we tell Cashin to drop the freeze and let you keep your miserable little business running. Fight us, and you lose everything you have left." I looked down at the massive stack of paperwork. I looked at the 5 of them standing in my home, breathing my air, entirely convinced they had backed a helpless, pathetic animal into an inescapable corner. I reached slowly into my suit pocket and pulled out a sleek, heavy silver fountain pen. I saw my mother's eyes light up with greedy, desperate anticipation. She practically vibrated with excitement. Rowan smirked, nudging Cashin with his elbow, whispering something I couldn't hear. I did not sign the paper. I tapped the heavy silver pen against the glass table, the sharp clink echoing loudly in the tense room. "You want the house?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm, completely devoid of any emotion. "Fine, you win. But I am not signing this in the dark like a coward. If I am handing over my biggest financial asset, I want it done publicly. Tomorrow night is Rowan's big promotion party at Meridian Corporation. The whole executive board will be there, the CEO, the clients, right?" Rowan frowned, suddenly suspicious. His smug smirk faded slightly. "So what if they are?" "So," I said, leaning back deeply into my leather chair, "I will bring the fully signed deed to the party. I will hand it over to you in front of everyone. You get your house, Rowan. You get to look like the wealthy, successful, dominant family man in front of your bosses. And in exchange, Lorelei drops this pathetic lawsuit, and Cashin unfreezes my accounts immediately." Lorelei narrowed her eyes, leaning in and whispering something quickly and frantically into my mother's ear. My mother smiled, a cold, predatory, victorious grin. She thought I was completely surrendering to her dominance. She thought I wanted to save face in public and pretend I was a generous brother. She thought she had broken me completely. "Deal," my mother snapped, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. sharp. Wear a decent suit, Julian. Try not to embarrass us in front of the real executives. Don't be late." They marched out of my house, leaving the unsigned papers on the table. I watched them pull out of the driveway through the pouring rain. I picked up my phone and dialed Tobias. "Tobias," I said, staring at the empty, wet driveway. Execute the Meridian Protocol. Fire up the legal presses. Call the board of directors. It's time to show them what a real executive looks like. They thought they were bringing a knife to a fistfight. They had absolutely no idea I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on their entire reality. The next morning, the sky over the city was a bruised, heavy, oppressive gray. It felt entirely appropriate for the corporate execution I was about to perform. I did not go to my decoy office. Instead, I stood on the corner of 5th and Madison, a few blocks away from the towering, impressive glass skyscraper that housed Meridian Corp headquarters. I stood in the cold wind, my overcoat buttoned tight. Exactly. "Are the papers ready?" I asked, taking the glass, feeling the cool condensation on my fingers, my heart beating steadily. Gideon opened a bespoke, reinforced leather portfolio and handed me a pristine, massive stack of highly sensitive documents. This wasn't a cheap quitclaim deed for a 3-bedroom house. This was a fully ratified, SEC-approved, board-certified transfer of majority voting shares. As of exactly 9:15 a.m. that morning, my private equity firm had officially, legally absorbed Meridian Corp in a multimillion-dollar buyout. The board signed off at midnight, Gideon confirmed, tapping the heavy, watermarked paper. "I am officially retired as of today. You are the sole controlling entity of Meridian. You own the building, the assets, the contracts. I must say, Julian, keeping this completely quiet was a masterful stroke of corporate espionage. The industry won't know what hit them until the press release goes out on Monday morning. The stock is going to rally." "And the specific personnel file I requested?" I asked, setting the massive acquisition papers carefully aside. Gideon chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. He reached into his briefcase and handed me a second, much thinner folder marked Confidential. "Rowan's file. Your brother is an incredibly interesting case study in stupidity, Julian. He was slated for the Director of Regional Sales promotion tonight. But upon reviewing the deep internal audits you requested, my forensic accountants found massive, undeniable irregularities in his expense accounts. He's been actively using company funds to cover the astronomical interest payments on his black market debts. It's corporate fraud on a massive federal scale." I opened the folder. The evidence was absolute and undeniable. Bank statements, forged expense reports, fake client dinners, fake vendor invoices. Rowan was not just a terrible, incompetent businessman. He was a desperate corporate criminal one step away from a federal indictment. "My legal team has prepared the termination papers," I said, tracing the sharp edge of the folder. "I will be delivering them personally tonight at the gala." Gideon looked at me with a profound sense of respect and understanding. He knew my history. He knew about the Thanksgiving dinner 10 years ago. He knew exactly what this moment cost me. A man who builds his own castle brick by brick does not need to beg for a tiny seat at a wooden table, Gideon said quietly. "Take your throne tonight, Julian. Show them exactly who you are." I stepped out of the Rolls-Royce a block from my decoy office, the heavy, world-altering folders tucked safely under my arm. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away, gliding silently down the busy street, I noticed a woman standing completely frozen outside a nearby upscale coffee shop, holding 2 expensive lattes. It was Daphne, Rowan's fiancée. Daphne was a ruthless, superficial social climber who had always looked right through me at family dinners. She tolerated me only because I was Rowan's blood, treating me like the hired help. Now, she was staring at me in absolute, paralyzing shock, her mouth slightly open. She had just watched the failed, broke consultant step out of a $2 million vehicle after a highly private meeting with one of the city's most famous, reclusive billionaires. I didn't stop. I didn't acknowledge her. I didn't even blink. I walked straight into my building. Let her mind spin. Let her panic. Let her wonder. It wouldn't matter in a few hours anyway. Inside the decoy office, my real team was waiting, heavily armed with information. Tobias was pacing the floor, adjusting his tie, practically vibrating with excitement. Sylvia, my relentless, brilliant, and terrifyingly efficient executive assistant, had transformed the dingy conference table into a high-tech corporate war room. Laptops were open, phones were ringing, printers were humming. "Sylvia," I said, tossing the Meridian files onto the center of the table. "Give me the status report. The illegal asset freeze your father attempted has been legally obliterated," Sylvia reported instantly, handing me a sleek tablet displaying court dockets. I routed the massive countersuit through our corporate division's legal team. Cashin, the bank manager, is currently under active investigation by federal banking regulators for bypassing strict security protocols to aid your father. He will be fired by his regional director by tomorrow morning. His pension will be frozen, and he might face jail time. "And Victor?" I asked, looking over at Tobias. "Victor signed his onboarding documents with Meridian Corp this morning," Tobias chimed in, grinning like a predator who had just trapped its prey. "He legally resigned from our decoy firm, foolishly forfeited his stock options, and surrendered his entire severance package to join Rowan. He is now officially a standard, at-will Meridian employee." "Which means," I said, feeling the cold, absolute satisfaction settle deep into my bones. "He answers directly to me." "Exactly," Tobias said, clapping his hands together. "Everything is set perfectly. The gala starts at 8 p.m. sharp. The entire executive board expects Gideon to give his emotional farewell speech and announce the new majority owner. They do not know it's you. Your family thinks you are coming to surrender your house and beg for mercy. They have absolutely no idea they are walking into a complete slaughterhouse." I walked over to the small, dusty mirror hanging in the corner of the decoy office. I adjusted my suit jacket. It was an unbranded, bespoke suit woven in Italy. It didn't scream wealth with flashy logos. It whispered absolute, untouchable power. For 32 years, I had swallowed my pride. I had let them take my college fund. I had let them throw me out into the freezing cold. I had let them mock my clothes, my car, my home, and my life. I had played the quiet, failing son because the truth was too heavy for them to carry. But tonight, the charade was officially over. Tonight, I was going to give them the brutal reality check they so desperately begged for. "Sylvia," I called out without turning away from the mirror. "Call the venue management at the gala. Ensure my family is seated at the VIP table right at the front of the stage. I want them to have a perfect, unobstructed view of the execution." The board was set. The trap was armed, loaded, and completely inescapable. The golden child was about to lose his fake crown, and my parents were going to watch me burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I thought about my mother's mocking voice, demanding my house. I smiled. A cold, merciless, terrifying smile in the mirror. They wanted a transfer of power. I was going to give them exactly that. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, situated right in the beating heart of the city's elite financial district, was exactly the kind of venue specifically designed to make very small, insecure men feel incredibly important. It was a massive, cavernous, oppressively opulent space dripping with multi-tiered crystal chandeliers, heavily polished Italian marble floors, and thick, noise-dampening velvet drapery that seemed to swallow the light. This was the chosen battleground where Meridian Corp hosted its lavish annual executive gala. It was a night entirely dedicated to corporate backpatting, the aggressive consumption of wildly expensive vintage champagne, and the ruthless, competitive display of fabricated wealth. I arrived at exactly 7:45 in the evening. I did not take the $2 million Rolls-Royce Phantom that Gideon had offered me for the night. That would have been entirely too loud, too flashy, and too obvious. Instead, I took a standard, inconspicuous black car service and walked through the towering glass revolving doors of the hotel lobby with the quiet, unhurried, steady pace of a man who had absolutely nothing left in the world to prove. I checked my heavy wool overcoat at the front desk with a polite smile to the attendant. I took a moment to adjust the cuffs of my dark, unbranded, bespoke Italian suit in the mirrored reflection of a pillar. I did not wear a flashy, diamond-encrusted watch. I did not wear aggressive gold cufflinks. I knew that true power does not ever need to announce itself with shiny, distracting objects. True power simply exists in the room, taking up space, breathing quietly, waiting patiently for the exact right moment to strike. As I walked down the long, heavily carpeted hallway toward the main ballroom doors, the muffled, sophisticated sound of a live jazz quartet and the sharp clinking of crystal glasses grew steadily louder. The air smelled of expensive perfumes, roasted meats, and desperate ambition. The very first person I saw before I even entered the room was Daphne. She was standing near the grand entrance, holding a delicate flute of champagne, wearing a shimmering designer evening gown that probably cost significantly more than the down payment on my first car. When her eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto me, her posture instantly stiffened as if she had been struck by lightning. The terrifying memory of seeing me step out of Gideon's massive luxury vehicle that morning flashed clearly across her heavily contoured face. Her eyes darted wildly, frantically, from my impeccably tailored suit to my completely calm, relaxed expression. She opened her mouth to speak, to perhaps ask the burning, agonizing question that was clearly eating her alive from the inside out, but I didn't give her the chance to form the words. I simply offered her a polite, completely hollow, chilling nod and walked right past her, leaving her standing frozen in the lobby. Let her drown in her own rising paranoia. Let her wonder what exactly was about to happen to her perfect plastic life. The ballroom was absolutely packed to the brim with the city's corporate elite. Hundreds of people in sharp tuxedos and flowing evening gowns were aggressively networking, laughing entirely too loudly at mediocre jokes, and trading heavy cardstock business cards. But my eyes did not wander. They immediately locked onto the designated VIP table positioned directly at the front and absolute center of the main stage. There they were, the royal family of delusion. My mother, Vera, was draped in a heavy, emerald green silk dress, wearing a massive pearl necklace she had undoubtedly bought on multiple maxed-out credit cards just for this specific occasion. My father, Silas, was wearing a rented, stiff tuxedo that was slightly too tight across his aging shoulders, clearly uncomfortable but trying desperately to look the part of a wealthy patriarch. And sitting right in the middle of them, holding court like a conquering, triumphant king, was my younger brother, Rowan. He looked incredibly, nauseatingly smug. He was surrounded by a small group of his peers and mid-level managers, holding a heavy crystal glass of expensive scotch, laughing loudly with his head thrown back at a joke someone had just made. Sitting quietly at the very edge of the table, looking incredibly pale and much like a political hostage, was Victor. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the cold, air-conditioned air of the ballroom fill my lungs, and walked slowly, deliberately toward their table. Every step felt like a drumbeat leading to an execution. My mother was the very first to spot my approach. Her eyes narrowed instantly into dangerous slits, scanning me aggressively from head to toe. She looked closely at my suit, trying desperately to find a cheap label, a frayed hem, or a poor fit to openly mock. But the sheer, undeniable quality of the Italian wool and the perfect cut confused her. She couldn't compute it. So, she settled on her default, familiar expression of bitter, condescending disappointment. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," my mother said, her voice intentionally loud enough to draw the curious attention of the surrounding executives at the neighboring tables. "I was honestly beginning to think you were going to hide in that pathetic little house of yours and purposely ruin your brother's big night out of sheer jealousy." Rowan turned around slowly in his plush chair. He looked me up and down, a smirk playing on his lips, and let out a short, highly dismissive laugh. "Julian, you actually wore a real suit. I'm genuinely impressed. Did you rent that from the discount strip mall down the street? Or did you borrow it from a client?" A few of his sycophantic colleagues chuckled politely, eager to please the man they firmly believed was about to become their powerful new regional director. Victor, however, did not laugh. Victor was staring intensely, almost frantically, at his sparkling water glass, his older hands trembling slightly against the white tablecloth. I ignored the laughter. I pulled up an empty, heavy banquet chair from an adjacent table and sat down right across from Rowan, placing myself directly in his line of sight. I rested my hands calmly on the pristine white tablecloth. "You told me to be here tonight, Rowan. You and Mother specifically requested my presence. You told me to bring the legal paperwork for the real estate. I am simply here fulfilling my family obligations, exactly as demanded. My father leaned aggressively across the table, smelling heavily of cheap, overpowering cologne and expensive scotch. Do you have the quitclaim deed, Julian? Tell me right now you aren't here to cause a ridiculous scene. Cashin at the bank is a very impatient man, and your accounts are still frozen solid. You have zero leverage. Don't play stupid games tonight. Just hand it over. I am not playing any games, Dad, I said, my voice dangerously calm, completely devoid of the fear or intimidation they expected. I reached slowly into the inside breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out the thick, heavy manila envelope containing the unsigned property transfer. I placed it squarely on the table, right next to Rowan's half-empty scotch glass. The paperwork is right here. Everything required by your lawyer to completely finalize the transfer of power. Rowan's eyes lit up with sheer, unadulterated, blinding greed. He reached his hand out eagerly to grab the envelope, his fingers literally twitching with anticipation. He thought he had won. He thought he had finally broken me. I placed my hand firmly, heavily over the envelope, pinning it securely to the table. Not yet, Rowan. He glared at me, his jaw tightening in sudden anger. What the hell do you mean, not yet? Give me the damn papers, Julian. You're embarrassing yourself in front of my colleagues. I am a man of my absolute word, I said, looking him dead in the eye, watching the very first, tiny flicker of uncertainty spark behind his arrogant facade. I explicitly said I would hand it over publicly. I want to wait until the CEO, Gideon, gives his grand farewell speech. I want to wait until you are officially announced to the company as the new regional director. I want this transaction to be a permanent, unforgettable part of your legacy tonight. My mother smiled. It was a twisted, victorious, deeply ugly expression. She leaned back in her chair, triumphant, and took a long sip of her red wine. Oh, let him have his little moment of pathetic drama. Rowan. He just wants to feel important for 5 minutes of his miserable life. Let him hand it over after the big speech. It just makes your victory that much sweeter. He wants an audience for his surrender. Rowan relaxed slightly, sinking back into his chair, though he kept his hungry eyes glued to the manila envelope under my hand. Fine. Have it your way. But the absolute second Gideon steps off that stage, you hand that envelope over to me, you walk out of this hotel, and you go back to your miserable little failing life. Are we completely understood? Completely understood? I replied, my voice smooth as glass. The 5-course dinner service began shortly after. It was an absolutely torturous, agonizing hour of watching my family gorge themselves on roasted filet mignon, truffle mashed potatoes, and lobster bisque. They loudly boasted to absolutely anyone who would listen about their incredible, fabricated success. My mother leaned over and aggressively told the wife of a senior vice president that she had single-handedly funded Rowan's elite education, sacrificing everything, and had personally mentored him into the brilliant corporate titan he was today. My father aggressively networked between bites of steak, trying to leverage Rowan's upcoming promotion to secure exclusive golf invitations at private country clubs he could never actually afford. I simply sat there in absolute silence. I did not eat a single bite of the rich food. I drank a single glass of sparkling water with lemon. I watched them build their magnificent, glittering house of cards higher and higher into the sky, completely, utterly unaware of the Category 5 hurricane that was currently brewing just outside the ballroom doors. At one point during the dessert course, Victor abruptly excused himself, muttering something about needing to use the restroom. He looked physically ill. I waited exactly 30 seconds before I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and followed him out into the quiet hallway. I caught Victor aggressively splashing cold water on his face in the opulent, marble-lined men's bathroom. The room was completely empty except for the two of us. When he looked up and saw my calm reflection in the massive mirror, he physically jumped, gasping, splashing water all over his expensive new Meridian Corp silk tie. Julian, Victor stammered. his face completely draining of color, wiping his wet hands frantically on a linen towel. What are you doing in here? You shouldn't sneak up on people. I leaned casually against the cold marble sink, crossing my arms over my chest, observing him like a specimen in a lab. Just checking on my newest employee, Victor. How is the new corporate job treating you so far? Is the salary everything you dreamed of when you sold me out? Victor swallowed hard, looking around the empty bathroom nervously as if expecting someone to jump out of the stalls. Look, Julian, I'm genuinely sorry about how things went down at your decoy office yesterday, but you have to understand my position, man. I have a mortgage. I have to look out for my own family, my wife's medical bills. Rowan is on the absolute fast track to the top. He has real power here, real influence. I couldn't afford to stay on a sinking ship with you. It was just business. A sinking ship, I repeated softly, letting the heavy words hang in the echoing bathroom air. You taught me how to read a complex balance sheet, Victor. You taught me how to spot a fraudulent asset from a mile away. Did you actually take the time to look at Rowan's personal financials before you blindly jumped ship? Or did you just look at the shiny silver logo on his leased Porsche? Victor frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. What are you talking about, Julian? His financials are flawless. He's a senior executive. Nothing, I said, uncrossing my arms and stepping away from the sink, leaving him in the cold. Just make sure you pay very, very close attention to Gideon's speech tonight. You wouldn't want to miss a single crucial word of your new corporate orientation. I left Victor standing alone in the bathroom, staring blankly at his own pale reflection in the mirror, the very first terrifying seeds of absolute panic finally taking root deep in his mind. I walked calmly back to the bustling ballroom. As I took my seat back at the VIP table, the main lights in the massive room slowly dimmed to black. The jazz quartet stopped playing mid-note. A single, blindingly bright white spotlight illuminated the main stage. The entire room fell into a hushed, reverent, electric silence. It was finally time. Gideon walked onto the massive stage with the slow, incredibly measured, heavy grace of a man who owned the very ground he walked on, the building he stood in, and the careers of everyone in the room. He was dressed in a classic, impeccable, custom-tailored tuxedo, his distinguished silver hair catching the harsh, bright light of the spotlight perfectly. He stepped up to the clear acrylic podium, adjusted the microphone downward with a loud thump that echoed through the speakers, and looked out over the sea of expectant faces. Down at our VIP table, Rowan sat up perfectly straight in his chair, aggressively adjusting his silk tie, practically vibrating with uncontained excitement. My mother reached out across the table and squeezed his arm affectionately, a look of pure, toxic pride on her face. My father proudly raised his scotch glass in a silent, preemptive toast to the stage. They were entirely, utterly ready for their glorious coronation. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Gideon began, his deep, resonant, commanding voice echoing powerfully through the massive ballroom, commanding absolute attention. Thank you all for being here with us tonight to celebrate. For over 40 years, Meridian Corp has been my absolute life's work. We have weathered brutal economic storms, aggressive industry disruptions, and massive global market shifts. We have built an institution strictly founded on integrity, clear vision, and absolute financial transparency. He paused deliberately, letting the heavy weight of his words sink deep into the quiet room. I looked sideways at Rowan. The word transparency didn't even seem to register in his thick, arrogant skull. He was just waiting to hear his own name. But time marches on as it always does, Gideon continued, a slight, nostalgic smile touching his weathered lips. And true, effective leadership knows exactly when it is time to step aside and let the next generation take the helm of the ship. Effective at exactly midnight last night, I officially signed the legal paperwork to fully retire as the CEO of this incredible corporation. A massive, collective gasp swept rapidly through the room, immediately followed by a wave of frantic, shocked murmurs and whispers. This was massive news. It was not public knowledge. The senior board members sitting in the front rows kept their faces entirely neutral and professional, having been briefed, but the mid-level managers and regional directors were visibly stunned and panicking about their job security. Rowan leaned forward abruptly, whispering loudly to my mother, unable to contain himself. "This is it, Mom. He's stepping down right now. The new CEO is going to come up and personally announce my promotion to regional director. This is massive for us." As of this morning, Gideon's powerful voice cut sharply through the rising noise, silencing the entire room once again in an instant. Meridian Corp has been fully, legally acquired in a private, highly confidential, multi-million-dollar buyout. The new owner is one of the most brilliant, ruthless, and visionary private equity minds in this entire country. He is a truly self-made man. A man who intimately understands that true, lasting value is built from the ground up through blood and sweat, not handed out on a silver platter or inherited through nepotism. Rowan nodded vigorously in agreement, completely lacking any shred of self-awareness, arrogantly assuming Gideon was describing the exact type of aggressive leadership Rowan himself supposedly embodied. "It is my absolute honor," Gideon said, raising his hand and gesturing directly toward our side of the ballroom, "to introduce to you all the new majority shareholder, the sole controlling entity, and the brand new CEO of Meridian Corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and welcome Mr. Julian." The profound silence that followed that announcement was not just quiet. It was a physical, heavy, suffocating vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. For 3 agonizing, cinematic seconds, absolutely no one moved. No one clapped. No one breathed. The massive spotlight swung rapidly across the dark room and landed directly, blindingly on our VIP table, illuminating me in a massive circle of harsh white light. I sat perfectly still, and I watched the exact, beautiful moment reality violently shattered my family's minds. My mother's face went completely, terrifyingly slack. The smug, victorious, arrogant smile she had worn all evening literally melted off her face in real time, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated, paralyzing horror. Her mouth opened wide, but absolutely no sound came out. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. My father's hand went limp, and he dropped his heavy crystal Scotch glass. It hit the pristine white tablecloth, shattering instantly, sending expensive brown liquor spilling everywhere, soaking directly into his rented tuxedo pants. He didn't even flinch. He didn't try to clean it up. He just stared at me, his eyes wide and bulging, his breathing suddenly incredibly shallow and frantic. But Rowan's reaction was the absolute best of all. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a medical emergency. He looked wildly at the stage, then at the blinding spotlight, then slowly, agonizingly, back at me. His brain completely short-circuited trying to process the impossibility of the situation. He started shaking his head, a pathetic, jerky, rapid motion. "No," he whispered, a high-pitched, reedy, desperate sound. "No, no, no. That's a mistake. Gideon misspoke. That's a joke. He means me. He said the wrong name. Tell them it's the wrong name." I stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of 1,000 people on me. I calmly buttoned the single button of my bespoke suit jacket. I reached down and picked up the thick manila envelope containing the deed from the wet table. I looked down at Rowan, who was practically shrinking, collapsing into his chair. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through their profound shock like a surgical scalpel. I walked calmly away from the table, stepping out into the main center aisle. As I walked slowly toward the stage, the applause finally, thunderously began. It started slow, uncertain, then rapidly erupted into a deafening, massive roar as the senior board members stood up, leading a massive standing ovation for their new boss. I walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs to the main stage. Gideon stepped aside with a wide smile, offering me his hand. I shook it firmly, projecting absolute authority, and stepped up to the acrylic podium. I looked out at the massive, clapping crowd. Then, I looked directly down at the VIP table right in the front row. My parents looked like they were trapped in a horrifying nightmare they couldn't wake up from. Victor, sitting at the edge, literally looked like he was about to vomit into his napkin. "Thank you, Gideon," I said smoothly into the microphone. My voice echoed with absolute clarity across the massive room. "And thank you all for your incredibly warm welcome tonight. Meridian Corp has a brilliant, highly profitable future ahead of it. But before we can possibly discuss the future of this company, we must aggressively and publicly clean up the toxic rot of the past." The applause died down immediately. The room sensed a massive, dangerous shift in the atmosphere. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. People leaned forward in their seats. "I am a man who heavily values absolute financial transparency and corporate integrity," I continued, staring directly, unblinking, into Rowan's terrified, wide eyes. "Which is exactly why my very first act as your new CEO was to initiate a deep, uncompromising, forensic audit of our regional management teams and their operating budgets. I wanted to ensure that the people holding power and trust in this company were men and women of absolute integrity. Unfortunately, we found a severe criminal infection." I looked off to the dark side of the stage and nodded sharply. Felix, the strict, heavily feared, no-nonsense director of human resources, walked briskly onto the stage carrying a thick, bright red, highly classified folder. "Felix," I said into the mic, stepping back slightly, "please read the summarized findings regarding the regional sales division directly to the board." Felix adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, opened the red folder, and leaned heavily into the microphone. He did not sugarcoat a single word. "Upon forensic financial review of the corporate expense accounts directly tied to Mr. Rowan," Felix stated, his voice clinical, loud, and utterly devastating, "we have uncovered a systematic, highly organized pattern of severe corporate embezzlement. Over the last 14 months, Mr. Rowan has fraudulently billed this company for over $85,000 in fabricated client dinners, phantom vendor invoices, and entirely unauthorized, lavish personal travel expenses." The crowd gasped loudly. The room instantly erupted into frantic, shocked whispers. People were pointing. Rowan grabbed the edges of his table, trying desperately to stand up to defend himself, but his legs completely failed him. He collapsed heavily back into his chair, sweating profusely, shaking violently. Furthermore, Felix continued loudly, speaking forcefully over the rising crowd noise. "Deep background financial checks reveal that these stolen corporate funds were illegally, electronically funneled to pay off exorbitant interest rates on unregulated, violent, black market personal loans. Loans intentionally taken out to fund a fabricated, lavish personal lifestyle, including a luxury leased vehicle and a downtown penthouse apartment that is currently in active eviction proceedings." Down at the table, my mother put her hands completely over her face, shrinking down in her chair, trying desperately to hide from the hundreds of judging, disgusted eyes completely focused on her table. My father looked at the floor, absolutely destroyed. "Thank you, Felix," I said, taking back the podium. I looked down at my brother, who was now weeping openly, silently. "Rowan, you are not getting a promotion tonight. You are officially terminated from this company, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and theft. Your corporate accounts are permanently frozen. Your severance package is entirely revoked due to criminal negligence, and our powerful legal department is currently preparing to hand these massive files over to the federal authorities for criminal prosecution." Before Rowan could even react, two massive, intimidating security guards in sharp black suits materialized silently from the shadows, stepping up aggressively to either side of Rowan's chair. "Now," I said, my voice dropping lower, becoming completely, terrifyingly devoid of mercy. "Yesterday, you explicitly asked me to bring the legal paperwork for my house tonight. You and Mother specifically demanded that I hand it over to you publicly, in front of your peers." I unsealed the heavy manila envelope. I pulled out the crisp and signed predatory quitclaim deed. I walked slowly down the short carpeted steps off the stage and stood directly in front of my brother. He was shaking violently, thick tears welling in his eyes and spilling down his cheeks, ruining his expensive suit. You told me winners make hard sacrifices, I said softly, leaning in so only the VIP table could hear my words over the buzzing crowd. I took the thick legal deed, gripped it tightly, and ripped it slowly, deliberately in half. Then I ripped those halves into quarters. I held my hand out and dropped the torn, ruined pieces of paper directly into his glass of expensive scotch, watching the ink bleed into the brown liquid. "Enjoy the Porsche while you still have it, Rowan," I whispered coldly. I stood up straight and looked at the large security guards. "Escort this man and his guests completely off my property. Immediately. If they resist, call the police. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey." The immediate, chaotic aftermath of the gala was a masterclass in pathetic, groveling desperation. Instead of leaving the hotel quietly with the security guards and salvaging whatever tiny shred of dignity they had left, my parents and Rowan caused an absolute, screaming scene in the lobby, desperately begging the guards to let them speak with me privately. Because I wanted to look them in the eye one last time, I obliged. I had the security team escort them up the private elevator to a soundproof, glass-walled executive conference room on the top floor of the Meridian building. I walked in exactly 5 minutes later, flanked by Tobias, who held a legal briefcase, and my highly intimidating executive assistant, Sylvia. The exact moment the heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing us in, my mother threw herself aggressively toward me, ugly tears streaming rapidly down her face, completely ruining her expensive, carefully applied makeup. "Julian! Julian, please!" she sobbed hysterically, holding her shaking hands out as if trying to grab the lapels of my suit jacket. I took a deliberate, disgusted step backward, keeping a firm physical barrier between us. "You can't do this. He's your baby brother. You're going to send him to federal prison. They'll ruin him. You have to stop this immediately. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." My father, who had been completely, brutally stripped of his arrogant, patriarchal bravado, looked like a punctured, deflated balloon. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "Son, listen to us," he pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. "This is family business. We don't need the police. We can handle this internally like men. You're the CEO now. You have absolute power. You can easily sweep this under the rug. You have the money to pay off his massive debts and make the loan sharks go away. Please, don't destroy your brother's entire life over a stupid financial mistake." I ignored their pleas. I walked slowly over to the head of the long, polished mahogany conference table and sat down in the heavy leather executive chair. I looked at the 3 of them standing near the door like frightened, pathetic refugees. "A mistake?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet, soundproof room. "A mistake is forgetting to file a tax return on time. A mistake is missing a monthly mortgage payment. Embezzling over $80,000 to pay off violent, illegal loan sharks so you can pretend to be a wealthy executive is not a mistake. It is a highly calculated, malicious, criminal lifestyle." Rowan was actively hyperventilating in the corner of the room, pulling frantically at his expensive silk tie as if it were physically choking him to death. "Julian, they're going to kill me," he whimpered loudly, thick tears spilling over his cheeks, snot running down his nose. "The guys I borrowed the cash from, they don't take monthly payment plans. If I lose this high-paying job, if I don't get the massive lump sum from selling your real estate, they're going to break my legs. Or worse, you have to save me. I'll do anything. I'll be your assistant. I'll scrub the floors." I leaned forward slowly, resting my elbows heavily on the mahogany table. "You want me to save you? The exact same way you saved me 10 years ago when you needed startup capital for your fake app? The way you and Mom and Dad drained $40,000 of my literal blood, sweat, and tears from my college fund, leaving me to freeze to death in a cheap motel?" My parents physically flinched backward as if I had struck them across the face with a baseball bat. That was a long, long time ago, Julian, my mother cried out, aggressively clutching her pearl necklace. We made a bad judgment call. We are your parents. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. You owe us your loyalty. I owe you absolutely nothing, I stated, my voice turning to absolute ice, freezing the air in the room. I paid my massive debt to you the night you threw me out into the snow with a negative bank balance. But since we are so eagerly talking about family loyalty and trust, let's talk about Aunt Beatrix. I picked up a sleek black remote control from the table and pressed a single button. The high-end, surround sound audio system in the conference room hummed to life, and the crisp, painfully clear recording of Aunt Beatrix's voice filled the room, inescapable. Vera, I'm at his place now. He's weak. He looks tired and defeated. Keep the pressure on him. Don't let up for a second. Once you get the deed signed, we can flip this prime real estate on the market, pay off my credit card debts, and you get the rest for Rowan. Just make sure the idiot signs it before he talks to a real lawyer. My mother's face went entirely bone white. She stared up at the ceiling speakers in absolute, paralyzing terror, her jaw hanging open. You didn't want the house to help Rowan host fancy executive dinner parties, I said, brutally exposing their final, rotting lie to the harsh light. You were actively, maliciously conspiring with Beatrix to strip me of my only major asset to save this criminal from his own massive ego, and to pay off her rampant shopping habits. You used Lorelei to file a fraudulent, baseless lawsuit to trap me. You used Cashin to freeze my bank accounts to starve me out into submission. You tried to completely, utterly destroy me. Suddenly, the heavy conference room door opened violently. It was Daphne. She had managed to bypass the lobby guards in the chaos. She walked straight up to Rowan, not looking at anyone else. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply grabbed her hand, pulled the massive, fake diamond engagement ring off her finger, and threw it directly, forcefully at his chest. It bounced off him and hit the floor with a sad ping. You're a complete fraud, Daphne spat, her voice dripping with absolute, unfiltered disgust. You don't own the car. You don't own the apartment. You're completely broke and you're going to jail. My lawyer will be contacting you to ensure you don't drag my name into your criminal mess. Do not ever contact me again. She turned sharply on her designer heel and walked out, the heavy glass door slamming shut behind her. Rowan collapsed heavily to his knees on the carpet, burying his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably like a toddler. I stood up. I smoothly adjusted my suit jacket. Tobias, I said, not looking at my pathetic family anymore. Ensure the termination papers are officially filed with the state. Turn the entire audit evidence over to the police department tomorrow morning. And tell security downstairs if any of these 3 people ever step foot within 500 yards of this building, or my private residence, they are to be immediately arrested and charged with trespassing. I walked out of the conference room without a backward glance, leaving them drowning completely in the absolute, unavoidable wreckage of their own consequences. 6 months later, the dust finally, completely settled, and the universe violently corrected itself. The consequences for my family were absolute, rapid, and utterly devastating. Rowan never actually went to federal prison. Meridian Corp opted not to press formal corporate charges to avoid a messy, protracted public relations scandal that could hurt the stock price. However, the violent black market lenders he owed money to were not nearly as forgiving as the justice system. The very week after he was publicly fired, the dealership aggressively repossessed his leased Porsche in the middle of the night. 3 days later, he was forcefully evicted from his luxury downtown apartment by armed sheriffs. To save him from literally having his legs broken by his highly impatient creditors, my parents were forced to completely liquidate their 401k retirement funds and sell their comfortable, middle-class suburban home at a massive loss. They paid off his shadow debt, leaving themselves completely destitute and near bankruptcy. They currently live in a cramped, moldy 2-bedroom apartment on the very bad side of town, constantly fighting about money. Rowan, the golden boy, the visionary, the future CEO, now works the grueling graveyard shift at a massive regional logistics warehouse. loading the exact same heavy cardboard boxes I used to load 10 years ago to survive. Aunt Beatrix did not escape the brutal fallout either. I ensured the crystal-clear audio recording of her fraudulent real estate conspiracy was anonymously, quietly leaked to her wealthy husband and her entire high society social circle. She was completely excommunicated from her elite country club. Her husband filed for a brutal, aggressive divorce, ensuring she got nothing in the settlement due to a prenuptial agreement, and she is currently drowning in the massive credit card debt she desperately tried to pay off with my blood. As for Victor, the man who selfishly betrayed me for 30 pieces of silver, I didn't fire him. Firing him would have been entirely too easy. He would have just found another job. I kept him fully employed at Meridian Corporation, but I permanently stripped him of his senior advisory title. I demoted him to a junior data entry position, placed his small desk in a windowless, freezing cubicle right next to the noisy basement server room, and froze his salary permanently, ensuring it never adjusted for inflation. He spends 8 agonizing hours a day doing mind-numbing paperwork, knowing completely that he answers directly to the man he tried to throw under the bus. Justice wasn't just served. It was catered on a silver platter. I am standing right now, looking out of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse CEO office. The sprawling city stretches out endlessly below me, a massive, glowing grid of lights, traffic, and ambition, bustling with millions of people fighting their own quiet, desperate battles. The glass in this office is thick, heavily soundproofed, keeps the loud city noise out, keeps the chaos out. For the absolute first time in my entire 32 years on this earth, my environment, my mind, and my soul are completely, unconditionally peaceful. When you grow up in a deeply toxic, narcissistic family environment, your brain becomes permanently wired for constant warfare. You learn to read dangerous micro-expressions at the dinner table before the plates are even set. You learn to anxiously anticipate the shifting, violent moods of parents who view you not as a child, but as an asset to be managed. You learn to constantly apologize for things you didn't do, just to keep a fragile, fake peace in the house. You are indoctrinated to firmly believe that love is highly transactional, that you must constantly earn your right to simply exist in your own home by being useful to them. It took me a brutal decade of absolute grinding work, building a financial empire in the absolute dark, facing panic attacks and exhaustion, to realize the most important, liberating truth of my entire life. Sharing DNA and blood does not automatically make someone your family. Blood simply makes them a biological relative. Loyalty, deep respect, mutual protection, and unconditional care are what actually make a family. Last week, my brilliant executive assistant, Sylvia, walked cautiously into my office holding a crumpled, cheap, heavily stamped envelope. It had my name written on it in my mother's familiar, shaky, cursive handwriting. It had somehow bypassed the strict corporate mailroom security filters. I took the envelope from Sylvia's hand. I didn't feel the familiar, terrifying spike of anxiety in my chest that used to haunt me. I didn't feel a sudden rush of hot anger or a massive wave of tragic, overwhelming sadness. I felt absolutely, profoundly nothing. The emotional umbilical cord connecting me to that woman had been completely, surgically, permanently severed. I used a silver letter opener to slice open the envelope. It was a long, rambling 3-page letter from Vera. I read exactly one single sentence near the top. "Julian, we are struggling so hard to buy basic groceries, and your brother's back is hurting terribly from the warehouse labor. If you have any shred of humanity or family love left in you, please forgive us and help us with the rent." I didn't read the rest of the pathetic letter. I didn't need to. It was the exact same manipulative, guilt-tripping script they had used to control my entire life. They weren't genuinely sorry for what they did to me. They weren't apologizing for stealing my college fund, or trying to steal my real estate, or plotting my financial ruin. They were only sorry that they had tragically lost their golden goose. They were only sorry that the weapon they aggressively forged in the dark had finally turned the lights on and exposed them. I walked calmly over to the heavy-duty industrial paper shredder sitting in the corner of my office. I fed the 3 pages into the machine without a second thought. I watched the sharp steel blades violently rip her desperate, manipulative words into tiny, meaningless strips of confetti. I tossed the empty envelope into the trash can, walked back to my large mahogany desk, sat down, and went right back to reviewing the highly profitable quarterly earnings report. I have actively built my own true family now. Tobias is not just my brilliant lawyer. He is the fiercely loyal brother I never had. He stood by my side when I had absolutely nothing but a cheap suit, a wild idea, and a broken heart. Sylvia is the fiercely protective sister who guards my peace, my schedule, and my sanity with an iron fist. Gideon is the wise father figure who saw my absolute, raw potential and chose to carefully nurture it, rather than aggressively exploit it for his own selfish gain. And more importantly than anything else, I have finally found my true purpose in this world. A month after the massive acquisition of Meridian Corp, I established a private, heavily endowed educational foundation. We don't advertise it loudly on television. We don't do flashy PR stunts. We actively, quietly seek out brilliant, driven young men and women who have been financially abused, emotionally abandoned, or maliciously cut off by their own toxic families. We step in where their parents failed. We provide them with massive, full-ride college scholarships. We completely bypass the strict need for parental cosigners on their student loans. We provide them with housing stipends, and we offer them high-level corporate mentorship programs within Meridian Corporation. We are building a massive, unstoppable army of survivors. Because I know exactly, painfully what it feels like to stand in the freezing November snow with an empty duffel bag and an empty bank account, wondering why the people who created you don't want you. I am using my massive financial power to ensure that as many kids as possible never, ever have to feel that bone-chilling cold again. Sometimes the absolute hardest, most agonizing thing you will ever have to do in this life is look directly at the people who raised you and finally accept that they are deeply, fundamentally, irreparably broken. You have to radically accept that you cannot fix them with your overwhelming success. You cannot buy their genuine love with a massive inheritance or real estate, and you absolutely cannot shrink yourself small enough to make them comfortable with their own failures. Sometimes the absolute greatest act of self-love is building a massive, towering, impenetrable wall, putting those toxic relatives firmly on the outside, and walking away to build your own life without ever looking back over your shoulder. The guilt will absolutely try to eat you alive at first. Society, friends, and neighbors will tell you, but they're your parents. Or you only get one family. Let them talk. Society doesn't pay for your intense therapy bills. Society didn't sleep in that cheap, freezing motel room with you, and society won't protect your hard-earned retirement or 401k from greedy scavengers. You have the absolute, undeniable right to protect your peace. You have the right to legally and emotionally close the door on anyone who brings chaos, theft, and abuse into your sanctuary, no matter whose name is printed on their birth certificate. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I know it was incredibly heavy, and I know it explored some very dark corners of family dynamics, but it is the harsh, unspoken reality for so many of us who had to become the architects of our own rescue. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to deal with the agonizing pain of a stolen inheritance, a brutal divorce from toxic family members, or had to draw a hard, unforgiving legal line in the sand to protect your own future from the very people who were supposed to protect you? Share your personal story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. We are actively building a strong community of survivors here, and your powerful voice matters more than you know. And please, don't forget to hit that like button on this video and subscribe to the channel so you absolutely don't miss the next incredible journey. Until next time, stay incredibly strong, fiercely protect your peace, and never, ever apologize for the magnificent empire you built from the ashes they left you in.